Russia's Air Force is collapsing. Here's the proof. In 2025, Russia planned to deliver 15 new fighter jets. They've delivered one, just one. But it gets worse. Right now, 550 out of Russia's 1,200 fighter jets are reaching the end of their service lives. Engines are failing, avionics are obsolete, and Western sanctions have destroyed the supply chains that kept these aircraft operational. The result? Putin's Air Force is now cannibalizing its own fleet, stripping parts from grounded jets just to keep others flying. This isn't the military of a global superpower. This is a patchwork operation held together by desperation. Let me show you exactly how bad things have gotten. The sanctions stranglehold. The spark of this downfall can be traced to the sanctions imposed on Russia following the invasion of Ukraine back in 2022. At the time, we knew it as bad, but we didn't really understand the ramifications it would have on Russia's aerospace industry. Since then, more than 90% of the precision components used in Russian fighter jets, from engine sensors to composite materials, came from suppliers that were from the West. As you can imagine, the ignition of the Russia-Ukraine conflict meant that those supply lines have fizzled into thin air. Due to the inability to get the ball bearings or engine turbines, among other things, the Russian aircraft manufacturing process has been brought to its knees. That is why they have only been able to deliver one out of the 15 aircrafts that they plan to release in 2025. This is an astonishing and equally disappointing 93% production failure rate. Due to this stunning failure rate, technicians in the Russian air bases have been forced to choose between keeping their fighters in hangars or stripping the others for their parts. This so-called cannibalization of their planes isn't a rumor either. In fact, companies like Aeroflot, the flagship airline of Russia, have documented how they have been tearing grounded passenger planes apart so that they could use their parts for the military. As if that isn't bad enough, Russian engineers have resorted to looking out for Chinese substitutes. Unfortunately, this hasn't given them the desired results, as the Chinese parts tend to fall apart 10 times faster than the ones made in the West. Terribly times for the Russian aerospace industry. As a result, we found that a little less than half of the Russian active fighter fleet, approximately 45%, should either be retired with immediate effect or be overhauled entirely. This is easier said than done, though, as the facilities to do so are no longer in existence. Till something is done, it looks like what is left of the Russian fighters will take to the skies until they can't anymore. The Ukraine war acceleration. As we hinted at earlier on, the war in Ukraine made things 10 times worse for the Russian air fleet. Thanks to the conflict, the Russian Air Force had to go into overdrive as the jets were forced to fly 3 times more than their recommended operational hours. At first, the Russians tried to hide this fact, so much so that if you took a look at the Russian data on the matter, you'd find that they only suffered relatively small aircraft losses. However, leaked Ministry of Defense documents tell us a different story. In fact, a perusal of the files show that dozens of the Russian aircrafts have been destroyed in combat. As if that wasn't bad enough, dozens more jets have been lost to mechanical failure and crash landings. But here's where it gets truly devastating. Russia's once elite pilots, they're vanishing, killed in combat, fled the country, and those who remain, many are refusing to fly what they're now calling death traps. Think about that for a second. Pilots, trained for years at massive expense, would rather face punishment than get into these aircraft. So what's Russia doing? They're throwing in fresh recruits, hastily trained pilots with minimal flight hours, trying to control malfunctioning jets in live combat. It's a recipe for disaster. And the maintenance situation? It's beyond belief. Crews in the field are improvising with car parts, Soviet-era manuals from the 1980s, and hand tools designed for completely different machines. We're talking about fighter jets being held together with improvised solutions that wouldn't pass inspection on a civilian airplane. Here's the shocking part. More Russian jets are now grounded by maintenance failures than have been destroyed by Ukrainian missiles. Let that sink in. Russia is defeating its own air force faster than the enemy is. If you are a veteran watching this, please let us know what you think about Russia's maintenance crisis in the comment section below. Specific aircraft disasters. Thanks to a certain level of documentation, we can take a look at the failures that have been experienced from one aircraft to the other. First, there was the Su-57 Felon. Apparently, this was the crown jewel of the Russian stealth program, as it was put together in a bid to rival the F-22 Raptor. Unfortunately, this would not play out like that, as we are not sure that up to 10 of these Su-57s exist. As if that isn't bad enough, we also found that half of those that may be in existence suffer from one major issue or the other. If its radar-absorbent coating doesn't peel off, then its engine is bound to experience some overheating. Then there is the fact that its senior fusion system, the one that was supposed to rival that of the West, is unfinished. Just one of the many failures of the Russian jet fleet. Then there is the Su-35 Flanker E. Once dubbed to be a fourth-plus generation powerhouse, we find that this jet is facing grounding once news spread that the AL-41F-1S is experiencing engine failures. This proved to cripple this fighter jet, as you cannot find any replacement engines in the market today. As a result, we find that every hour flown brings it ever closer to its destruction. It's almost like a Greek tragedy when you think about it. Let's also take a look at the MiG-31. Considered to be the Cold War interceptor that still forms the backbone of Russia's long-range defense, we find that even this stalwart is facing its decline, as they found that its once powerful radar systems are now failing. This is most likely due to the repeated power module failures and the outdated calibration software that the Russians didn't see fit to upgrade for many decades now. This seems to have deteriorated thoroughly when it comes to the MiG-31. We must not forget about the Tu-160 Blackjack bomber, a once heralded aircraft that was the symbol of Soviet glory. Although it is still a massively imposing figure, you will find that most of its airframes are more than 30 years old now. To make matters worse, its 1980s-era avionics and refurbished parts that have been salvaged from grounded parts have failed to revive it to the stature it had in its glory days. Turkey, a relic of the Russian air fleet system. Things have gotten so bad that countries like India and Algeria have started freezing orders for the Russian jets. As if that isn't bad enough, these long-time loyal Russian jet buyers have started buying Western jets such as the F-15EX or the Gripen. A truly sad state of affairs when it comes to how far the Russian fighter jets have fallen. Industrial base collapse? When we look into it, we cannot talk about the collapse of the Russian air fleet without talking about the Russian aerospace industrial base itself. For some decades now, we found that the foundation of Russian military aviation was supported by the brilliant minds of the Russian engineering sector. We're talking about a blend of Soviet veterans with post-Cold War innovators. Unfortunately, this all came to an end when the Russians got into that conflict with Ukraine in 2022. Thanks to this international conflict, we found that thousands of the top engineers in Russia have fled to the West or Asia. Too many of them were seeking to survive so that they could find stable jobs in places like the US or one of the many countries in Europe. That way, they could also have access to modern technology, which is great because it will only improve the quality of their work. As a result, not only has there been a massive brain drain in Russia, we also find that the only thing that is left in the Russian design bureaus are overworked staff that work in underfunded teams. To make matters worse, they are forced to work with outdated equipment and software. It must truly be frustrating for these people, especially those that work in factories such as the Komsomolsk-on-Amur aircraft plant and the Irkutsk aviation plant. As we speak, they have been forced to undergo partial shutdowns as they just don't have the parts or the raw materials to carry on with their work. What really makes the entire thing laughable to a point is that even the so-called indigenous aircraft programs in Russia still depend on Western technology one way or the other. For example, the previously mentioned Su-57 still makes use of microchips that were made in the West. Without these chips, they would not be able to make use of their radar or their flight control systems. We really wonder how they are getting on these days, as these chips are currently available to them due to the expert bans. Understandably, another side effect of the issues we are facing is that quality control is at an all-time low. Nobody cares these days if these aircrafts arrive with defects, even though they had just been rolled out of the assembly line. What is a wiring fault or a hydraulic leak to the Air Force these days? They are just happy enough to have a new aircraft in their hangars. No wonder nobody ever wants to get into their fighter jets these days. As such, we can see how the once proud Russian aerospace empire is a pale shadow of its former self. In fact, what we find is that the only thing that is supporting it is propaganda, rather than production. A truly sad state of affairs, strategic death spiral. When we look at the state of things, we may find that the collapse of the Russian Air Force isn't just a maintenance story, it's a strategic implosion. You see, as NATO makes its progressive movements eastwards, the alliance's air forces are also making waves when it comes to their technology, readiness, and coordination. As we speak, countries like the US, the UK, France, and some of the smaller members of NATO are integrating fifth-generation fighters like the F-35 and the Euroguiders into the fleet, thereby creating a strike network that the Russians cannot compete with. A truly dreary state of affairs as the gap slowly widens into an abyss. Mind you, China is watching the events as they unfold. You cannot blame them for seeing Russia's current state of affairs as a chance to dominate the defense export market. That is why you will find that some of the former Russian customers are now making their way to China so that they could get their hands on the J-10C and the JF-17 Block 3. As a result, we have found that Russia's export sales have plummeted by almost 30% since 2021. This is shocking, especially as they were once the second largest exporters in the world after the US. As a result, NATO does not consider the Russian Air Force to be an existential threat anymore. Right now, even the Kremlin's modernization goals for 2030 are now a distant dream. It truly is a full-blown death spiral. If you think Russia's air power is finished, type "game over" in the chat right now. Closing reality check. Here's the simple truth. Russia's advanced fighters are museum pieces held together by desperation and duct tape. Behind the cool footage and staged propaganda clips that may be circulating today, a look behind the curtain will reveal a decaying fleet and a broken industry. And it's getting even more broken by the minute. The sting is made even worse by the fact that while the West builds, Russia slowly crumbles as it fights to maintain the decomposing relics of the Soviet Union. If you've made it this far, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we're breaking down more military myths and exposing the truth propaganda won't show you.